Welcome, and thank you for joining us for this exciting new STEM learning series, AI Sprints, a dynamic, fast-paced exploration of artificial intelligence in education. We want today to be more than just a discussion. It's an opportunity to engage with cutting-edge AI applications, live demos, and thought-provoking conversations that will shape the future of learning. AI is transforming classrooms, opening new opportunities for innovation, creativity, and collaboration between educators, students, and their communities. With AI Sprints, we go beyond the traditional webinar or podcast format. This is an interactive, real-time experience designed to ignite ideas and spark meaningful dialogue. Together, we'll explore practical, innovative, and ethical strategies for integrating AI into education, ensuring it empowers both teachers and students. Throughout this series, you'll have the chance to witness live AI demonstrations that bring emerging technology to life, but also hear from expert guests leading the way in AI and education. Take part in engaging, real-time discussions to tackle AI's potential and challenges in the classroom, and gain insight and strategies that you can apply immediately to enhance teaching and learning. So whether you're a teacher, a school leader, or an advocate for the responsible use of AI in education, we really hope that this series will inspire, challenge, and equip you to navigate this rapidly evolving landscape. AI is already shaping the world around us and the way we learn. Our goal is to ensure it's done ethically, inclusively, and with real educational impact, so that young people and those supporting them can have agency in an AI-driven world. We're thrilled to have you here today for this journey into the future of AI in education. Let's get started.
Good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're joining from in the world. My name is Alex. On behalf of STEM Learning, welcome to episode 2 of the AI Sprints. We got warmed up last week with Priya Lakhani and Darren Coxon looking at AI in the fast lane. And just to say, if you missed that episode, don't worry, you can catch up on the STEM Learning community. If you're a member already, just go to the member area and you will find the recording forever there. And you can use that with your colleagues for your CPD and your discussions. And if you're not part of the STEM Learning community at the moment, no problem. It's free to join. 50,000 people are already part of the community. So jump on STEM Learning community. Tim will share a link today in the chat feed and you can join. So welcome to episode 2. Episode 2 today is sponsored by Quizzes, and we're going to have a demo around halfway through this session. And I'm delighted to introduce 2 heavyweights from the world of assessment, AI and education in Daisy and Jim. Going to do a little intro in a minute on these 2. I'm delighted to have them here with us today. Daisy is a very well-known character in education, director of No More Marking, and has just released a groundbreaking study that we're going to discuss very, very shortly. So tune in for that because it's very, very interesting. It has huge implications for education, I think. And within that, No More Marking focuses on comparative judgment. So if you're not sure what that is, Daisy will mention it, I'm sure, but it's taking 2 pieces of work and comparing which is the strongest against the criteria. Also, she is a prominent voice in the world of artificial intelligence and the author of numerous books. One of them was a very divisive book, Daisy, when I first started teaching, called 7 Myths of Education. And that, I know a lot of teachers know you through that, and that kind of divided education, that book, for better or for worse. So that was an interesting publication. Jim also is a fantastically well-known character within education spaces, former cabinet minister in the Labour government and current member of the Privy Council and House of Lords. He's a national politician and he has expertise in policy within this country, but also globally. He recently came over with me and the team from STEM Learning to Dubai and gave a really heartwarming keynote about the future of education. So we're in good hands today, folks, and really delighted to have you here. And I want to kick off, guys, with a question from Joe Arde, actually. He doesn't know I borrowed this question, but I really like it. And it's about putting AI back in its black box and whether we should do that or not. And I'll just set this up because if people are wondering what I'm talking about, black boxes in computing have got a long history, and it's about input in and output at the end of it, but nobody really knows what kind of happens in the middle. So I guess the metaphor that Joe's alluding to is, Daisy and Jim, should we put AI back in the black box when it comes to assessment? Yes or no? Who wants to kick off?
After you, Daisy.
Yeah, I'm happy to take that one. We think about the black box a lot, and you're right, it is a huge issue. And it's been one of the reasons why actually up until quite recently, we've been skeptical about using AI for assessment, because the massive problem with AI is that black box, is that you don't know how it makes its decisions. And there's about a 50, 60-year history of getting AI to do assessment. And the reason why it's never sort of quite worked for assessing essays has been because of that black box, because you don't know how it's making its decisions. And that's been a big problem. And a lot of the time you get these very superficial correlations that look amazing, and people will say, oh wow, we've got a 0.8, 0.9 correlation with human judgment. And you dig a bit further and you realize that's because actually, how is the AI making its judgments? It's judging on length. Like, so that's one of the most familiar kind of flaws with traditional AI models. If you just judge on the length of a piece of writing, you probably will get a 0.8, 0.9 correlation. But the minute the kids know that, you're going to get chaos. They're just going to write the same thing. They're going to write the same paragraph 50 times, and they're going to game the AI. So I think the black box issue is really important. And, you know, when we come to look at the studies that we've just released, I'll talk about some of the ways we're overcoming that and how we are more certain than we were before that we can get around this issue, and the AI is judging on things that humans value.
Brilliant. Okay, so it's kind of a no from you then, Daisy. Don't put it back in the black box, correct?
Yeah. Don't put what we're doing back in the black box. Other things you still want to put them back in the black box. Yeah.
Okay, brilliant. Jim, what about yourself?
Yeah, Alex, I was at the BBC's R&D department earlier on today, and I kind of asked them the same question about black box AIs, and I think their answer was probably the right one, that there's some AIs that are so complicated that it's really hard for anyone to explain transparently how they work, but they are pretty powerful. Transparency is a really important principle around AI, particularly with some of the debates that we're having around, you know, copyright as an example, and, you know, the creators, the owners of IP wanting to know whether or not their data has been used to train the AIs. You know, transparency is a really important answer to that. So that's saying, you know, we should keep it outside the black box of being opaque. But I do think there are advances in the technology now, which means using some black box AI is in the public interest, is the right thing to do. But we have to very clearly flag that that's what we're doing. That this has been done using AI, and the basic principles behind, and the sort of the values behind that AI, being transparent about those, even if we then can't explain exactly how all of the algorithms have worked.
Okay, amazing, thank you. And in the chat feed, we've had some votes, and the majority of people, Tim tells me, are saying no, let's not put AI back in the black box. Let's keep it open interpretation and move forward, which is really poignant, actually, because Daisy, we're going to touch on some research that you published this week, which I feel is really poignant, actually, in the world of AI and education, because there has been a paucity of research, particularly in the UK secondary school setting, particularly with children in the classroom and around assessment. It tends to be kind of higher education focused. So I'm just going to kind of sort of set this up, what we're about to speak about, which I think is fascinating. And I know you've published this, and this is in the public domain. Tim's going to pop some links to this in the chat feed now. So people, you can read this whilst we're talking about it. You can read it afterwards. But essentially, this study, Daisy, that your No More Marking, your company did, it wasn't just you and your own, it was the company. 5,251 year 7 students. So if you're not from the UK, that's 11 and 12-year-olds in 44 secondary schools within the UK. So that's a big sample size for starters. And in total, 3,640 comparative judgments were made about student writing. The focus was very much on student writing here. And the AI agreed with 81% of the human decisions, which is incredible, isn't it? And I know you're going to talk us kind of through some of the findings. And the crucial thing here for you was the accuracy and speed, but also this idea that it's a viable time-saving device, but also combining the human and the AI together, there's something there. So over to you, Daisy. Tell us about the research.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. So yeah, as you say, we had lots of teachers taking part in this assessment. And what we were trying to do is to have teacher judgments and AI judgments, and essentially to measure that level of agreement between the two and try and validate the AI through the use of the teacher judgments. And just to give a little bit of context too, the technique we used for this assessment, and I think the thing that makes us different from a lot of other people working in this space, is comparative judgment. Now, we've been using comparative judgment to assess writing for nearly a decade now. And comparative judgment is very different from the way extended writing is marked by exam boards. So exam boards use the standard technique everyone will be familiar with in marking writing is known as, it's really a form of absolute judgment. And the basic problem with that is humans aren't very good at it. So absolute judgment is when you see one thing and try and place it on an absolute scale. We were using comparative judgment, which is the gold standard of human judgment, and which, interestingly, is the type of judgment that most of the big large language models out there, it's the type of human judgment that's used to train the large language model. So it's got this very robust kind of research backing. And what we were doing is we gave all the teachers these comparative judgments, and then we looked at the AI and we said, is the AI making similar judgments? And as you said, big headline finding, 81% agreement. And that's good, but go back to what I said at the start about the black box. Actually, we were less interested in the headline agreement. I could probably get you 81% by getting an AI, a basic AI model to judge on length. What we were more interested in is that other 19%. What are the errors? Where are the humans and the AI disagreeing? That's actually the most important thing. And the big breakthrough for us in this study that was different from what we've done before is twofold. So first of all, most of the disagreements were quite small. Secondly, where we did look at the big disagreements, there were some big disagreements, but when we looked at those, what was really striking is that our qualitative analysis, and we're following up with teachers on this literally kind of, today and kind of tomorrow and as we speak, our qualitative analysis of the biggest disagreements is that actually they were human error, not AI error. And we've actually shared a couple in some of the training we've done. I actually went and spoke to one teacher who made one of the bigger errors, and she was really honest with me. She said, I was biased by the handwriting. She said, when I look at it again and read the handwriting properly, I made the wrong decision. The AI was right. So this is very striking. We haven't seen this before. And this is why we think this really is quite a big breakthrough and addresses that black box issue we were talking about earlier, in that we do feel that AI is judging kind of on the right things.
Yeah. And what's really interesting about it is you kind of touched on it there, and I'm sure Jim will have some comments as well to kind of challenge on this. But humans are fallible. Us as teachers, we gravitate towards handwriting that suits our style, that we like. And sometimes we peep at the kid's name on the front of the paper and, they're a nice kid, but we'll give them an extra 2% and be lenient. Whereas sort of AI doesn't do that, does it? It doesn't have that kind of human tendency. So when you combine that and the fallibility of humans, you've almost got like perfect symmetry. I mean, Jim, what's your take on this research?
I'm really excited about it. I think it's very interesting. Obviously the prize at sort of base level about getting teachers adopting AI tools, as is appropriate for them, is around time saving, and marking is a massive burden in terms of time for teachers and takes them away from really being able to reflect on their own practice and focus on children. And yet, of course, assessment is a really important part of teaching, and so it's a sort of necessary evil. But if the AI can help them with that, that's a fantastic thing. And I do think that we're moving towards the main interfaces with technology not being keyboards and mice, but being pens or pencils, e-pencils, and voice as being the main ways in which we can do it. Now that the AI recognizes our handwriting really well. I do some work with a company called GoodNotes, who are a note-taking app, and they've got a really interesting, their handwriting recognition and their maths annotation recognition is fantastic. And so they're now able to do some really interesting work in this area that I've been really struck by. But then I've also been struck by the importance then of addressing the digital divide, because if in the end we do want to realize the opportunities around this, yes, we could have people writing on paper and scanning handwriting and then looking at it in the way that we mark the GCSEs and the A levels and so on. But wouldn't it be better if people were just able to write directly onto their devices? But we do urgently have to tackle that digital divide issue if we're going to go down that road.
Yeah, and just on that, Jim, at sort of national level, government level, what sort of discussions are happening about the digital divide? Because you're right, it's so, to teachers in the classroom, it's so evident when we set homework which children have access to devices, because access to a device is one issue. Then there's the connectivity at home, isn't there, in terms of do they have bandwidth, can they get on these systems? So what's the kind of conversation UK based around how we tackle this digital divide?
Well, Look, I've been following this issue for a long time. I was the chair of the Good Things Foundation and I'm now patron, who are the main charity that are dealing around digital exclusion in this country, particularly in adults. I'm really happy that the current government published a digital inclusion strategy. I think it was last month, I think, or the month before, but yeah, very recently. Putting some proper money and some proper policy and strategy effort behind it. That's coming from Peter Card's department, the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology. So they've, in these cash-strapped times, found a bit of resource and quite a lot of attention from them as a department to try and do something about it, which I really welcome. And I know that the whole digital inclusion community is quite excited about being able to do something about that. That's for adults as well as for children. Clearly, school budgets are really challenged at the moment, and if we're relying on them, then I think we're still a way off. Is there a bring your own device solution? Well, there might be, and then we can use people premium money or use recycling of computers. There's quite a lot that corporates are doing around letting their redundant devices come and be converted into Google Chromebooks and so on, so that they can then be used in classrooms. There may be things we can do about that, but it still feels like we've got quite a lot more work to do.
Okay, thank you. And that's really insightful. Thanks. And Daisy, I just want to dive back into your research just for a little bit of more clarity on a few things. So in the blog post that you put up on your Substack, and if you don't follow Daisy's Substack, I should have started by saying it's one of the very few that when Daisy and the team, it's not just Daisy, the team at No More Marking post these posts, they're so interesting. I would implore you to dive in and have a look. I mean, the one that you did a few months back about like when you do comparative judgment and you shift them between position bias left and right and it hallucinates. Just found that absolutely fascinating. People don't really talking about that stuff. So I know it's in the chat feed, the link. Dive in, guys, and start following this because it's really cutting edge. And I want to look at, you wrote in the blog that you posted this week that the type of error matters. Yeah. What do you mean by that?
So this is a fundamental issue with all AI systems, not just in education. It goes back to what I was saying before about how it's quite easy to get your 0.8, 0.9 kind of correlations and agreement, because you can be judging or making decisions on something that's not causative, it's not causation, it's correlation. So this is arguably the fundamental philosophical issue with all AI systems. You started off with a black box, it's all about that. We don't know how they are making their decisions. If they are making it on tangential correlations that are not causative, then it is really easy for those systems to be gamed. And you see that with facial recognition. You see that where you will have adversarial attempts to game facial recognition systems by just tweaking pixels. And so you end up with a blur that looks nothing like a face, but the AI system for some reason thinks it is a face because of the way we don't know kind of why it's doing that. And as I said at the start, the most obvious kind of issue you have with this in the marking sphere is probably, the easiest example to give is the length issue. That there is a correlation between longer essays and eventual grade, but it's not causative. Something can be very good and short. Likewise, you can have something very long and waffly that isn't very good. So if that is the main thing that the AI ends up rewarding, that is a huge problem. And you will get the equivalent of adversarial attempts as you're getting with facial recognition. Another way of thinking about this, in a lot of fields, self-driving cars, it's known as the last mile problem. And a lot of critics of AI will say the problem with AI is it's 80% right, but it's wrong whenever you need it. The 20% where it's wrong is the crucial bit it's getting wrong. And as I would say, up until a couple of weeks ago, I would have had a lot of sympathy with that point of view. And we were running into that problem again and again. As I'm saying now, the types of errors it's making now are not the kind of howlers or the just obvious assessing on the wrong metric that we were seeing before. So, a couple of years ago when we started on this journey, we were seeing those issues around it is rewarding length, it is rewarding maybe waffle, it is rewarding things that superficially look good but have errors in. We're not seeing that now. And actually what we're seeing is the reverse, that actually we're seeing it picking up on some human bias and some human issues. I do want to throw in a couple of caveats. You alluded to position bias. Now, one form of bias we've seen the AI show, which humans do not show, is that the AI is more likely to change its mind depending on which piece comes first. So we're giving the AI pairs to judge, and we will find that it will change its mind, not all the time, but between 10 and 25% of the time it's changing its mind. depending on what way around they're presented. Now, because we know that, we can correct for that. And the way we correct for that is we're sending off every judgment twice, so we can see where it's an issue, and then we can adjust our model accordingly. So I don't want to pretend that this is all just, magic beans and overnight it's got better. We are putting in a lot of kind of psychometric and human validation and statistical techniques to iron out some of the issues. But we do feel like, having done that, we're getting to a place where it's a very powerful system.
Yeah, so just from a teacher's perspective, if I'm using a large language model like OpenAI's ChatGPT, and I upload 2 screenshots of 2 different students' work and compare it to the criteria, if I mark 100 pieces of work, between 10 and 25 of them, the opinion will change on the AI if I move it from left to right. That's essentially what you're saying, yeah?
Yeah. That's what we've been seeing. And that's not just us. A lot of people have experimented with all different kinds of comparative judgment techniques with AI. So in the blog that we wrote about this, we linked to a few other of them, and other people find something similar too. And yes, it varies depending on the LLM and whatever it is you're judging, but they do seem routinely to display a level of position bias that is greater than humans.
Yeah, fascinating. And Jim, I'm going to come to you kind of from a leadership point of view, because I know you work with a lot of school leaders, trust leaders, and people, very senior in education. And something that I hear often and run into is this idea that teachers and leaders are scared of assessment and AI models, and how kids are ripping them off to basically create their homework, and whether teachers should be allowed to use AI to mark work in the future. So what would be your advice, based on what we've kind of heard today and your background in this field, like to teachers and leaders, about using AI for assessment?
Well, first of all, I totally respect their caution and their skepticism. We went through the AI marking debacle during COVID, where the algorithm screwed up, and it massively impacted young people, and so that caution is correct. But I don't think that means that we just pretend it's not happening and pretend that there's not a great opportunity to help the workforce. And by golly, do we not need to help the workforce and to do more to retain teachers in the profession? And so, I do some work with Professor Rose Luckin, and she's basically saying, think now, act slowly, which is be deliberative in what you decide to do, but do so from a position of understanding and knowledge. So take the time to try and understand the way the AIs are working. Priya was on the podcast last week, her Business Century Tech, which I'm also involved with. That's traditional AI, that's machine learning AI, that's been around for a long time. Most of the conversation we're having now is about generative AI, which is quite a different beast, but has lots of potential for cheating, as well as for doing the kind of thing that we've just been talking about with Daisy. So take the time to understand it, understand the models, understand the values behind the different AIs, whether or not they accord with what you're interested in. Talk to people who are already using it, do the work, do the research, get someone in the team to do that for you. And then you're in a position to lead. But if you just pretend it's not happening, or just go, well, last time I looked at it, which admittedly was a couple of years ago, it was all a bit rubbish, that's not good enough. Because it's changing. Just the changes in the last 2 weeks in terms of what's been released by OpenAI, what's been released by Google Gemini. These are massive things that are happening as we speak, and we have to keep on top of it.
Yeah, and that chimes with both Darren and Priya's points last week, like you mentioned. They were both calling leaders to kind of not ignore this technology and embrace it. And a second kind of strand from that session was about oracy and speaking to the children about AI within our subjects, not just STEM subjects, but subjects more generally. And this is something we cover a lot of our STEM learning CPD. Tim will link that stuff if you're interested in joining any of those. And we look at assessment in quite a lot of detail in terms of how we can deal with the plagiarism and the authenticity of learner work, which is really, really fascinating. But I guess just going back to that kind of leader thing, Jim, and Daisy too, because Daisy, you taught in a school in London for a couple of years. You know what education's like at the moment in the UK. Should schools employ, do you think, an AI specialist or a little team, like an accelerator group? What would be your kind of advice to leaders that are a bit wary or not really savvy with this technology?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I'd say, look, I've talked to a lot of school leaders, and just literally in the last week or two, been having calls with lots of them. And I think, to be honest, I find a lot of the questions in their caution is sensible, and that they're asking the right questions, and they don't want to put kind of untried, untested technology in their classrooms. And I totally respect that. And I think it's the job of people working in organisations like ours to learn from them and to hear their questions and concerns and try and answer them. In terms of, what they should be doing, yeah, it's a good question. I mean, look, it depends a bit on capacity. I mean, we work with a lot of secondaries, we also work with a lot of primaries. There's a lot of very small primaries out there that don't have much capacity. They have head teachers who might still be teaching a few lessons a week. So, I wouldn't want to recommend a kind of one size fits all, everybody has to do this approach. You do tend to find often within a school, there are people who have a kind of natural, natural affinity with some of this stuff, and then they can often be the people who are best to share those insights with the rest of the school. But it is something I would agree, it isn't something where you can, I think, stick your head in the sand over this. And just a little anecdote from a focus group I did a few months ago with some students. I was asking them, do you use generative AI? And I used the phrase generative AI, and they looked a bit blank. I said, large language models. I said, no, I've never used that. And then one of them said, but I've used Snapchat to do my French homework, and it's amazing. Snapchat has a built-in AI. So there was me talking about LLMs, generative AI. They look blank, and I could have gone away from that thinking, none of them are using it. They're all doing their French homework on Snapchat. That's fantastic. I didn't know that Snapchat had that built in, and they didn't know what a large language model was. So we were kind of talking across each other. So no, I think it is here, and I think we do have to recognise for good and for bad, and there are bad applications of it. We have to be aware of what's happening.
And Alex, I think that goes to, I suppose, an encouragement that I would have, which is to involve young people in having these discussions. Teachers, young people, they'll know bits and bobs. Very few will have the full picture, but engaging both at the same time, get a sense of how young people are already using it. And at least there's a responsibility to understand that if you're a teacher in a school. And we've all had the adolescence chat been going on for a while following the Netflix series, but we've got to understand it from their point of view too.
Yeah, fascinating. And actually, Priya mentioned last week, Century Tech have got a set of slide decks. You'd love it, actually, Jim. You may have seen it. It's like, this house says this, and it's 9 statements you can use for Oracy to discuss AI, ranging from like international policy on it all the way through to should AI replace a teacher. And I tried it with my year 7s and 8s on Monday and Tuesday this week, and I absolutely loved it. The debate was like the room just lit up. So if that's something that's of interest to you, jump onto the STEM Learning community and you can catch up last week's and get that link, and you can email Priya's team and they'll send you the slide deck. And I would advise using it because it's just a great way to kind of talk to students about it. We're going to go very quickly over for a demo from the quizzes, and I just want to set this up. We're going to give these guys a breather for a second. And I've seen this demo. It's really fascinating. As a teacher in the classroom, I use quizzes quite a lot, and it's what we call a wrapper app in AI. So it's not like a large language model. So if you're new to AI, the large language models that Daisy and Jim have been alluding to, the most common ones are obviously things like ChatGPT, Gemini. A lot of people are using Claude now. There's other ones like DeepSeek from China, which we don't endorse at STEM Learning, but it is out there, and Grok, which is Musk's new baby. But Quizzes is different. It's a fantastic quiz app that allows you to integrate quizzes fairly seamlessly into your lessons, and it's really interactive for the children on the receiving end. And what's lovely about this platform is the way it pulls different PDFs links together to generate content really simply to save you work and make classrooms interesting. So I think, Tim, are we ready to play that video in the background? Here we go. Great.
Okay, so the first thing that we're going to look at with Quizzes AI is how to generate a quick assessment. So using Quizzes AI Create, I'm going to jump over here to assessment, and I'm going to choose the option Generate with AI. But do note that if I had past papers or worksheets that I've used before, this would be the option where I'm hovering my mouse to go to. Going down the generation with AI route, there are 3 primary ways that you can do this. We recognize that teachers have some wonderful resources that they can bring in. So anything that you have worked hard on over the years, a PDF, a PowerPoint, you could even snap a picture of a textbook. We can bring that in and make an assessment activity for you instantly. Likewise, any website or material that you regularly use online with your students, as long as it's not behind a paywall or password protected, just drop that URL into this box and we will generate an assessment for you there. Now, what we're going to do is go down the text or prompt generation, and I'm going to put in something simple. GCSE Maths. And let's go for 10 questions. The subject is going to be mathematics, and I'm going to choose year 11. Hitting on continue here, I am then able to collaborate with the AI to choose subtopics. And you will see within a matter of seconds that these questions start to appear on my screen. Typically, the whole generation process takes about 20 to 30 seconds. Now, I can use this quiz and jump over to my edit mode now, and you will see that I have my 10-question quiz that, should I wish to, I could go ahead and publish and share with my students. We would always recommend, though, a quick sense check just to make sure that you're satisfied with the questions and the direction they're taking your students in. The next thing that we're going to look at is AI to enhance your questions and your quiz. So I can be quite macro with this, and I can click where it says AI, and I can convert individual questions into different question types. So maybe I want to ease my students into things. I'm going to apply a reduce options or a 50-50 for that first one. Maybe a little bit further down, I want to click on AI and convert this one to a drag and drop exercise. Just the process of going through a slightly different question type is going to engage your students that little bit more than if they were just going through multiple choice after multiple choice questions. You will notice there are other ways that I can use and teachers can use AI to enhance their questions. A very popular one is to add similar questions. And what we're going to do here is see that Quizzes AI will scan the content. It will look at the tone and the pitch, and it's going to suggest 3 more questions. I'm not going to take this first one, but I am going to take the next 2. And you'll see I've got a 12-question quiz. One other way that Quizzes is very excited to be leveraging AI is to provide answer explanations. So this is the same quiz that I just created, and you'll see that, let's jump on to question 3, for example. I have 3 wrong answers, A, B, or D. Rather than just say to these students, you were wrong, the answer was C, they are given key ideas, a crucial step, and then a step-by-step explainer. So they're not only learning that the answer was C, they are learning why the answer was C. And you can see that we have the similar steps for each question. This works across the curriculum and is something that I would really encourage you to explore. And finally, I would like to share Analyze with AI. You'll see this at the bottom of my screen here on the reports page. I can access it with any activity that I have shared. So what Quizzes AI has done is it has identified, in this case, 3 areas of improvement for my class. I can then find out who the students are that need that little bit of extra help in that area, find practice quizzes, choose the one that I'm interested in, and I could then assign that to those 12 students and to those 12 students alone. If you'd like to find out more, please scan the QR code on the screen or visit this link, and a member of the team will get back to you. Thanks very much.
Fantastic. So that was a quick demo by John Neal, the CEO of Quizzes. And if you're a teacher coming to this, whether you're primary, secondary, sixth form, give it a go. It's fantastic. It's free as well. And the link will be in the chat feed. Just on the chat feed, I had a few questions during that 5 minutes that I'm just going to address quickly. First of all, this recording will be available on the STEM Learning community account. So you can join for free if you're not already a member. That's where the recording will live, and you'll be able to access that forevermore. And also, there will be links to that QR code in that, along with all the show notes from today. So if there's something that you missed, if you came in late, if there was something that someone said, it'll all be in there. You'll be able to catch up on demand, a little bit like a really good Netflix show. Let's move on. So Daisy and Jim, you haven't always agreed on everything in education, and that's disagreement to be a really healthy thing in this space, I think. So I want to kind of probe a little bit here and poke the bear a little bit and talk to you, Jim, to start with. You've been recently saying a phrase that caught me at Bet in London in January, but also out in Dubai, that we need to wrap education around AI is a phrase that you've used. So to wrap education around AI. So keeping on the theme of assessment, what do you mean by that? How can we wrap AI around assessment, Jim?
Yeah, I mean, I think actually the phrase that I think I've been using is about wrapping education, using AI to wrap education around children, and the possibility to hyper-personalize much more is something that's exciting. It's dependent upon the workload of teachers, is what every teacher wants to be able to do to differentiate really effectively, but that's really hard. But as potentially, as the AI gets to know you as a teacher, understands the context that you're working in, understands the materials that you like to use and that you find effective, understand the children that are in your class, and then I think that particularly as we start to move towards some different pedagogies, perhaps more flipped learning, for example, the opportunity to hyper-personalize becomes, to hyper-differentiate, if you like, becomes more real. And I think that that's an interesting thing for us to start to think about and start to chase after, so that we can keep every child engaged and keep every one of them in the right sort of zone of engagement and development. Are we ready to do that yet? Probably not. But could we do it? Yes, I think we probably could, and that excites me.
Okay, Daisy, anything to add to that one?
Yeah, so I think I've written a lot about personalisation in the past. A lot of what we're doing at the minute is really focused on personalisation. One of the things I've said about it is you do have to be careful, because it's a word that means a lot of different things to different people. What do you specifically mean? In my book, Teachers versus Tech, which I wrote back in 2020, I pointed out that sometimes the word personalisation is used to say we should personalise according to the learning style of the student. I'm not so keen on that. Learning styles don't exist. The kind of personalisation that I think is good is the kind of thing that's been around in a pre-generative AI world with adaptive learning tools, is to say, based on your responses to a bunch of questions, what should you do next? So a bit like what quizzes we're doing there. We can see that students have said this. If a student said this, the best next step is this. I think the enormous challenge, which I'm not saying is insurmountable, but which I think is not easy and is not going to be solved overnight, is how do you blend that level of hyper-personalization, which absolutely is possible with new technology and is useful? How do you blend that with an in-person classroom with 20 or 30 children in the same room?
Mm.
And the problem, the challenge you have is, unless you say those children in school are going to be sitting at screens all the time, it's really hard to do. And I think what we've seen in Silicon Valley is you've seen a lot of Silicon Valley funded firms who have gone down the route of the hyper-personalized playbook, where a student sits at a screen and the teacher kind of supervises, and actually parents are pulling back from that. They don't like it. They don't want their kid at the screen all the time. So I'm not saying, the personalization thing is, no, I do think it's really important. I'm saying the big challenge, and I think this is also where we see an assessment, the big thing that everyone is going to be focusing on the next few years is this hybrid human AI element of how do we get the blend of the very best bits of human connection, which nobody wants to lose, and the really powerful digital personalization and analysis that a human teacher cannot deliver. How do we get that? And those are not easy questions. I'm not saying they're impossible questions, but they're not easy questions, and they're not always resistant. They're not always sort of solved by the sort of the first maybe naive bit of thinking. We have to kind of go beyond and push a bit further.
And to an extent, Alex, Daisy, that's why I mentioned flipped learning, so that the possibility of using some of the adaptive learning platforms as homework prior to coming into the classroom means that potentially you can do some of the instructional elements of the learning, you can do some mini assessment, you can come into class with the teacher getting a rough idea of how much understanding there is in the individuals in the class. Coming to school becomes a profoundly human experience with lots of that human interaction that Daisy's right, none of us want to lose. And that becomes a rich engagement where you might do some peer learning, because you can pair people up, because you can see where they are together. You can devote teacher attention to those that really are stuck and need to be unlocked by the expertise of the teacher. There's a sort of a range of different things you can do as a result of leaning into that flipped model, which is possible once we've narrowed the digital divide.
Fascinating. Yeah, and just you kind of alluded to that human-centric word that Rose Luckin, as well as Professor Rose Luckin, speaks very much about, that kind of triangulation between the human and the non-human, being the machine, the AI. So it's really reassuring to hear that message from different reliable voices within the sector. So before we segue into the future of assessment, which is coming up on the horizon shortly, Jim, I do want to ask you about something that I know you've said word for word, because I heard you say it a couple of times. This is right this time. I might have misquoted the other one, but you've mentioned that the curriculum is obese, Jim. So just, and I know, Daisy, you've been a fierce defender of knowledge in the past, publicly and through writing, and particularly when it comes to research around sort of cultural literacy and the sort of the domain of knowledge in the classroom. So let's explore it a little bit. So Jim, what did you mean by that?
Well, look, knowledge is absolutely fundamental to education, and knowledge comes before skills. And I agree with all of that. But at the moment, the national curriculum, as it's being taught, particularly in Key Stage 4 in England, has just got too much content in it. And humanities teachers, history teachers, geography teachers, whatever, they're regularly saying to me that there's just not a hope in hell that they're going to get through all of the content in the time that they've got. And the same applies, physics. I was on a select committee here in the House of Lords a couple of years ago, and the Institute of Physics came and basically said that I'm looking at a quote here, but that it's overloaded with content, and it can leave the impression that physics is a large compendium of disparate facts, that essentially it's getting in the way of teaching the big ideas of physics, the big knowledge that's really important, because teachers are focused on just getting through a shed load of content. And if you happen to miss a lesson or be absent, and we're all worried about absenteeism at the moment, then you've not got a hope of catching up, just because the teacher's got to get on, because they've got to get through all the bloody content. And that's the problem. That's the obesity issue. There is an appropriate amount of knowledge that is manageable for teachers to be able to get through and to effectively communicate to young people, and that we can then assess and have a bit more freedom to assess the big ideas and to really test the curiosity and the interest and the passion of young people around that, and whether or not they can think like a historian, they can think like a mathematician, rather than just getting through all the content.
Okay. Daisy, what's your take on that?
So my take on that, so Jim kicked off by saying, knowledge is important, knowledge comes before skill. I'd actually say what my argument isn't that knowledge comes before skill. My argument's actually slightly subtler than that. It's that knowledge is skill. And what concerns me about some of the arguments, that Jim is making there, and there'll be some points where I do agree with him, and I'll say that in a moment, is that this idea that we can focus on big ideas by reducing content misses the point that sometimes the big ideas require content. And there's a great line which the cognitive science Daniel Willingham likes to quote from a famous sort of pioneering geologist. He says the best geologist is the one who's seen the most rocks. And there's an element of, if we strip back content, we actually end up stripping back ideas. Now, I do want to caveat this. And my caveat, actually, I would go the other way to Jim. Jim said he thinks the Key Stage 4 curriculum's overloaded. I'd go the other way. I actually think the primary curriculum is overloaded, not the Key Stage 4. So why am I saying that? My point is that if we think about some of the really successful kind of curriculums in the Far East, a lot of people have pointed out that in their early years, their maths curriculums in particular, have fewer concepts than ours. Particularly, they'll just focus on number for a really long time. Whereas our primary curriculum will bring in things like data handling and might do more stuff on geometry. And yet what happens with these curriculums is that the students get this really solid basis in the kind of fundamental underpinning concepts, and then they can move faster. So when those students are getting up to the equivalent of Key Stage 4, they are doing more of the content and they are racing through it, but they're able to race through it because the foundations are solid. I think we do need students, by the time they get to Key Stage 4, we do want to be challenging them. And there are students who are capable, and I think more than we think, who can certainly get through the content if the base is in place. And I think the reason why we have those problems at Key Stage 4 are not problems that should be fixed by stripping away the Key Stage 4 content. They're problems that we need to fix by looking at primary. So the two specific places where I would be keen on reducing content at primary are, number one, I would take out data handling from the primary maths. And number two, the thing I'm most passionate about, and which a lot of my day job is about, is I would radically slim down the primary grammar curriculum, and particularly the Year 6 grammar punctuation spelling test, which is a classic example of what I'm talking about, of the kind of running before you can walk. Is it had a load of content on modal verbs and fronted adverbials, and it never teaches students what a verb is. So I would strip that right back, make that much simpler, and I would actually keep Key Stage 4 and keep it, keep that content in it, because the reality is there are students who, are coping with that and can manage it. And I think if we get things right with the fundamentals, we can have more students who can handle that.
Fascinating. So knowledge and skills are there to coexist, not compete. and the scope at the primary curriculum potentially to slim down some of the content in really specific areas. So that's really, really interesting. And I think that sets up a really nice segue into what we're about to go into, which is the future of assessment. Because the things that I'm hearing from teachers when they speak to us on courses and out in the general sphere is that they're a bit worried about the future of assessment because they know that AI is here. They're asking me questions like, Alex, do you think that kids will be able to go into exams with an AI scribe? And do you think they'll be able to use their voice rather than writing them, or handwriting die, Daisy, as a result of this voice to text stuff? And it's really interesting. I don't have the answers for them. And when I speak to the exam boards, I've spoken to Pearson, OCR, and AQA, and they all have stuff to share with you guys today. It's going to go into the chat feed and into the show notes. Essentially, they're saying the following things. They're saying they all advocate for responsible AI integration, keeping teachers in the loop. So that's that human-centric bit that Daisy, your work leans into, and Jim, you were alluding to. They're testing or implementing on-screen and digital assessment models in the background, but they're very cautious about it. And I think this is quite an important point because, Jim, you mentioned, didn't you, about halfway through this episode, that the COVID fiasco, that AI kind of went through an identity crisis because those grades came out and those kids were kind of tarred by those grades, and it gave AI a bit of a bad name, the algorithm at least part of it. And then we had, and teachers, we were grappling with the fractured courage of our young people in schools as a result of those grades being not where they should be. So now we've got an opportunity to kind of reset and level the playing field. And is it the right point, going back to the obesity point, through assessment, when we review assessment and on-screen digital exams, is that the point where we slim down these bits that you two are speaking about within the curriculum?
Look, I'm not sure that is the point at which we necessarily slim down. Yeah, the assessment needs to be designed around assessing the curriculum that we've been set, and they've got to find the best way of doing that reliably and consistently. Certainly, if we're talking about the high stakes summative assessments of GCSEs, etc. The assessment community, the Pearsons, the OCRs, etc., they're on their journey. They've been doing on-screen marking for a while. They're ready to do on-screen testing, and indeed some on-screen testing is taking place in our GCSEs and one or two of the GCSEs in a few places, but Pearson want to do on-screen testing for English as an option. I think they're waiting still for Ofqual to give that the nod or the nay, but that's not actually going to use AI much. That's just going to basically be an option to be able to use a keyboard and a screen rather than pencil and paper, but it's the beginnings. The point at which you start to move into different interfaces of voice, whether we're ready to use pencils, I think that starts to get interesting in terms of the efficiency. What I could get really excited about, but I'm not sure the technology is ready for me yet, is whether we could do a viva at scale. It's a traditional form of assessment. You can't cheat using AI doing a viva. You've got to be able to just orally present. I think that lots of the elements of the technology are there, but some things like regional accents, I'm not sure are reliable enough in terms of the voice recognition and the voice to text. But I think that's something that the assessment community should be chasing after, because the opportunity for that then to be used for more project-based qualifications like the EPQ, the HPQ would be really exciting.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
I'm going to come in there actually, because we've actually done quite a bit of research in this area. So we've got quite a pioneering oracy assessment, and we've been working with Oxford University Centre for Educational Assessment to validate it. So we've got the technology up and running to be able to comparatively judge oracy performances. My colleague at Normal Marking, our founder, Dr. Chris Whedon, he previously used to work at AQA, had a lot of experience with managing and standardising some of the speaking and listening elements of the Modern Foreign Languages coursework exam. So those recordings. So I think there are interesting things here, and it's something, as I say, we are really excited to be pioneering, and we think it suits comparative judgment very well. I am going to add a big note of caution in that I don't think it is workable at scale for the kind of thing that Jim's talking about. And I would say that from our experience doing it and from working, I think we've had about 100 schools taking part in our pilots. It's incredibly, incredibly labour intensive. And again, okay, right, can we get the AI on that? Potentially, you know, maybe we need to look at where we do that. But it's a
Do you
tricky
mean
one.
the Beaver kind of presentation?
Yeah. I mean, at the minute, if you were doing it just with humans, it's not viable for large cohorts, even for just one assessment. And if you were talking about it being an option for every subject, it's just logistically like not workable with human judgment. You know, could you get AI judging it? I mean, I guess that is the next frontier and probably the next thing we'll have to be trying out. But I just want to bring in that note of caution that Vivas, they are literally a medieval technology. So I'm all in favour of updating the old and making it good, for making it new for the new world. But it's a tough one.
Yeah, it's a great point.
I mean, I totally accept that, and the constraint has been it's highly labour intensive, and therefore really, really expensive and kind of impossible.
Correct.
So the prize is whether or not AI could do most of that work, and then you would just have to have a human supervision of the AI marking and of the Viva. Maybe one day.
But some schools are doing it. I mean, there was a AQA speaker yesterday on a session that Mark Anderson, and they were talking about the Viva as well, and how some schools in the West Coast of America have done it, where they've invited parents in, a bit like the School 21 approach, where they bring parents in and they present to parents like a project of like. So it's definitely possible. But I wonder, like, if we're pivoting back to kind of the primary focus. As a year 7 computer teacher, I often find, guys, that the kids are coming to me from 14 or 15 different primary schools. Some of them can't type on a keyboard because they're used to touching screens. So we've got this issue where they do on-screen interaction rather than keyboards, okay? So if we're moving in the next decade to on-screen exams, what work do we need to do in our primary early years to prepare these kids for what they'll need to do on screen in 5-10 years' time?
So I can take that one. I think there's a really interesting kind of emergent area of research called embodied cognition, which is all about the ways that we don't just think with our brains, we think with our bodies. And we are not brains in a jar. We are not human brains, we are human beings. And I think sometimes it is easy to forget that. And it is easy to think you can sit behind a screen and get everything you need and want in life. And I don't think that's true. And I think what we're realizing from this really interesting field of embodied cognition is all of the ways in which a lot of quite physical analog activities do seem to really matter for learning, particularly in the early years, which is unsurprising. Like the younger the child, the more this is going to matter. So I think one really interesting field is that students who learn to write with a pen and pencil actually end up their recognition of letters and their reading is better than if they learn to write by typing. So there seems to be something about the process of handwriting that has an impact on the brain and helps it kind of imprint those understanding of those letters. With adults, there are a lot of studies showing that when adults take notes by handwritten, they remember more and have a more cohesive understanding of a lecture than if they type. Again, the mechanism slightly unclear, but that seems to be pretty robust. I like Jim's point about how we now have technologies. I have been really impressed by the way that pen and paper, digital pen technology has really come on leaps and bounds. The other thing that's come on leaps and bounds is the handwriting recognition technology. There are things that literally a few months ago we thought were impossible that are now a commodity. So, maybe there is something there. But reading is another one. That when adults and children read on screen, they skim and scan and have more shallow processing than when they read on paper. Now, sometimes that is appropriate. Sometimes you want to just skim and scan and get the gist of something, but sometimes it isn't. Sometimes I think we need to be reading books on paper. So I think this area of embodied cognition is going to be one of the most fascinating research areas of the next decade. And I think it's one to kind of keep an eye on. And we need to be really careful about just assuming that you can translate something from one medium to another and it just stays the same. Like there is a wealth of research across disciplines that shows that is not the case. In assessment, the literature is called mode effects. A big PISA study from a few years ago showing that their shift from the same questions on paper to on screen, kids did 6 months worse on average, right? Yeah. And the big philosophical underpinning is obviously Marshall McLuhan. The medium is the message. His whole point back in the 60s was not like, whether there were good TV shows or bad TV shows. His point was the fact that people now spend time watching TV and images and not reading as much. That's a decisive shift in a mode that in itself is significant. And I think we have to remember that, like, it's not just this neutral shift where you take the text and you put it on screen and it's the same as if it was on paper. It isn't. It might be better in some ways, it might be worse in others, but it is not the same.
I was talking to Dan from Cambridge Assessment earlier on today, and when they've been looking at on-screen testing, they see exactly what Daisy's been describing, where you move from paper to keyboard, and some kids do better, some kids do worse, and it's different demographics, different genders. There's just different effects, and we've got to be conscious of all of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think in certain educational circles, people are quite skeptical and kind of come at the exam boards about, why aren't we accelerating with the future of assessment in digital, and why aren't we digitalizing exams? They get quite frustrated. But I think it's wise, isn't it, guys, for these exam boards to proceed with caution, because at the end of the day, they've got a huge responsibility in their hands of kids' outcomes and future lives. And we can't just jump down this rabbit hole at a whim. We found out in COVID what was going to happen. So to those kind of naysayers that are pushing the exam boards, because we've shared in the links the updates for all of you. We've spoken to them all three this week, and you can see those in the show notes. You can see they've been very clear with us and very transparent about where they're at the moment. What would you say about giving them a bit more time to kind of find their feet, Jim? I know you sit on one board that we won't mention now because we keep it nice and neutral, but what would you say to the kind of naysayers around this?
Look, I would say I think the assessment community is in some ways quite impatient to be able to get on, but they're going to do so in the context of being highly regulated by Ofqual. So Ofqual needs to give them a bit more freedom to do a bit more if they want to, but they know, these are all businesses, some for profit, some not for profit, but they're big businesses employing a lot of people, and they've got it all on the line about being reliable and giving good, solid results for people that bear scrutiny. They don't want to get involved in lots of appeals. That's very expensive. So it's in their interest to get this right. And so they're not going to move really rapidly, because the public, the learners, our children, we want to know that they've got the right result. And that's the constraint that they're working in.
Sorry, just to jump in here, Alex, because I know we're really running out of time. I just want to draw attention to a couple of questions that have come into the chat. From one from Nick, another from another Nick, I don't know if it's the same Nick, around neurodiversity. So there is one which is, what is the percentage of teachers in Daisy's project were neurodivergent, and what about the percentage of teachers? Do you have any information on that? And also the fact that as Jim alluded to, some neurodivergent students and teachers benefit more from the use of technology as opposed to suffering. So I'll leave that one with you for 2 minutes and duck back away behind my black square.
Thanks.
I guess I'd come in quickly and say that a really big landmark kind of high quality natural experiment study done on PISA data in about, I think it was 3 different countries, showed that when they translated the questions on the PISA test from paper to screen, on average, kids did 6 months worse. So, that is a really, John Jerrim did the study, and that's a really high quality study. So I can completely get that for some kids, it might be better. I can understand that. Of course, there will be some. But on average, across this big study in 3 different countries, for kids to do 6 months worse, that feels to me, we have to be aware of that. And
all I'd add, Alex, is, with the on-screen testing, the proposition is around choice. So some would choose to do it on screen, some would choose to do it on paper. And embracing that diversity, I think, is important. So there will be some for whom a change would be really helpful, and some for whom it would be disadvantageous, and we need to operate within that context.
Yeah, incredible. And I know that the exam boards say exactly the same thing. So thank you for sort of bringing that in, Jim. And we're going to need to wrap, unfortunately. This has been fascinating. I've learned so much today, and I want to thank you both for coming on and kind of talking about some of the most prevalent issues in education. The chat feed's blowing up with some really positive comments about what you've shared with everyone today. So I want to thank you on behalf of STEM Learning and the wider community. Just to remind everyone that this recording will be available, I think, Tim, within the next 24 hours. I don't want to throw Tim under the bus there, but generally that's kind of how we work. Is that a thumbs up, Tim? Yeah, nice one. And just to say that on the 8th of May, we are back with Laura Knight and John Chippendale. So Laura Knight is fantastic. We're going to look at safeguarding, we're going to look at biases and ethics. And John obviously is the CEO of TeachMate AI, which is widely used by a lot of you. So he's going to show us what do they think about when they're designing these platforms. And that will be a really rich insight. So I want to thank everybody for coming wherever you've joined us around the world. I know we've got people out in the UAE, in America, Germany, England. So it's been an absolute pleasure. And have a wonderful evening. And if you're going off for your Easter break, make sure you relax. Don't work too hard, teachers and leaders, and we will see you very soon. Daisy and Jim, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Cheers, guys. Bye-bye.
See you. Bye-bye.
Cheers, guys.